Okay, I fixed it.
Hooray.
Just gonna, oh no. Okay. Okay, I believe that we are now live, so we can kick things off. My name is Sarah Greysdorf. I'm the founder of Holdette, the the organization hosting tonight's event. So I'll just give a little bit of background on us, and then we'll kick things off with our amazing panelists. At Holdette, our mission is to support women from the moment they get dressed in the morning. Tonight, that extends to those who identify as women and those who do not. Everyone is welcome tonight. We execute on that mission in two ways. The first is supporting women from the moment they get dressed. We are an apparel company specifically focusing on addressing the pocket problem, where women's pockets are 48% shorter than men's pockets. And we are launching our first line of women's suits this fall. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And then the second is through supporting our community through events, our Slack network, and workshops such as these. If you are interested in learning about upcoming events, you can join us on Instagram at Holdette or on LinkedIn also at Holdette. If you're interested in sharing about this event, you can do so using the hashtag Holdette Career Prep. And so without further ado, we're going to kick things off for the evening. Lonnie, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yes, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Lonnie. I am a university recruiter at Facebook. I've been in recruitment for about 5 years now, and I look at lots of resumes, so excited to chat with you all today. I'm tuning in from Santa Cruz, California, where it's nice and bright right now.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm a recruiter coordinator on site at Google via Nelson Staffing, as well as the founder of Red Thread Services, which is a career coaching business I started around 6 months ago, where I believe in each one of us, there's a hidden lock, and I want to help guide you to find your inner key to lock your full potential. So I look through resumes, and I'm super stoked to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Of course. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, Anastasia.
Hey everyone, my name is Anastasia and I'm also a university recruiter, but I'm at Tesla. And I currently started my career full time about a year ago, so I can, share my story and share kind of impact and advice from both a recent graduate and now university recruiter. I'm really excited to be here with everyone and excited for the rest of the questions.
Amazing. And without further ado, we'll jump in. For those live on the chat, feel free to drop questions in there and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can as the event goes on. But to kick things off, could you start by talking about quantifying experience on a resume in situations where work doesn't necessarily have numbers associated? I think we're always told, make sure you have numbers on your resume, show what you've done. What about in situations where it's less obvious how to do that? Lonnie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can definitely see why that tip would be something that folks advocate. However, I would sort of maybe challenge that statement about wanting to put a number to everything. I think rather than that, you should definitely more so focus on impact, right? So being as descriptive as possible while being concise is important, but you don't necessarily have to give it a number. So rather than, oh, I made 4,000 widgets, rather what impact did you make in your time at that company or in your role? Maybe you led a team of 3 folks, sure, that's a number, but you had a mission of partnering with certain types of people to launch a certain type of product or whatever it was. So I would say rather than the numbers, focusing on really descriptive verbs that of course describe what you were doing, the types of folks you worked with, and then of course the deliverable that you produced. So whether that was a dashboard or a product or a training that you created or some sort of deliverable in that way, rather than numbers. But I'd love to hear from the other panelists too in ways that they can, that you've maybe tackled this with other instances. But that's sort of my take on the quantification piece.
Great. Sarah?
Yeah, so I always like to say with the resume, go 3 to 4 bullet points and explain what you did, how you did it, and what the results were. I think it's really important, kind of as Lonnie was mentioning, like if you created a website, you can say, created a website, that's awesome. Like you explain into detail what you did, but we really want to see is what was the result of that? Like, why were you creating it? Was it to help, create like an efficiency or to gather data? I think a lot of times, like I remember I looked at one resume I was helping a client with, and this is like a number thing, but she did say like assisted with teachers. And I was saying like, okay, you did more than just like support like teachers. Like how many teachers did you support? What did this help with? Did this create like a better environment? Like I think in general, be specific in what you did, because there's only so much we can read from a resume. You know what you did, so we want to land you to those phone interviews so you can explain it, but be as specific as possible exactly what you did in your resume and in your job description.
Great. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think one thing I think we forget, and I really haven't heard too much focus on is, the flip side of being, having quantification is actually including soft skills into your bullet points, right? Tell us about, what leadership skills it took you to lead that team, right? Kind of like Sarah was mentioning, adding those action verbs and telling us, not only did you just assist the teachers, but how did you, what did it take to grow that relationship? How did it make an impact on the environment, as Lonnie said? To really focus on, a lot of times managers, come to me as a recruiter and tell me, I'm looking for a candidate that is hardworking, is a leader, and is, self-sufficient or is very independent, right? And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to find that on a resume, right? Because so much of our focus is on quantifications. But it really, I think when a resume really stands out to me is when individuals are able to tell us a story through their bullet points, tell us, not only just how many, for example, teachers they assisted, but what was the impact? What did they grow from it, right? What skills did they gain from those, from that experience and from that engagement? I think that's what really makes a difference. And that's what kind of makes one resume stand out from another.
Fantastic. It sounds like there's a lot of different ways to quantify impact, and numbers is, only one place to start. What advice do you all have for folks who are sending out their resume while also hoping to make an industry transition or kind of a role transition? I know there's a lot of folks, especially during COVID, who've been home, picked up new skills, want to apply those in a job. How do you recommend they kind of explain that in alignment with their past experience? Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, of course. So let me just clarify the question. So you're saying how they can put transitioning into a different role into the resume, right?
Sure, that, and also how can they kind of modify and change how they explain past experience to align with a career transition?
Okay, perfect. So usually what I like to do, especially in the career, looking at resumes, is I look at the job description, because the job description tells exactly what, an employer is looking for. So looking at those soft skills. So let's say like leadership skills or management skills, like maybe, yes, your role isn't specific to the field, but you have transferable skills. So really highlight those and those action verbs, because I think that's how you're able to explain how your skills are transferable to the current position or to the future position that you want to go into. I also really recommend too, not just resumes, but networking is super, super important. Reach out to people on LinkedIn in the positions that you're interested in going into. Don't just ask, say, hey, can I get a job? But reach out because you genuinely want to build that relationship with them, and also learn about their career story. And more importantly, learn if this day-to-day role that they're doing does seem something that you're passionate in as well. Because I think passion always speaks more, passion speaks volume.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think one thing I would add is, when you're thinking about transitioning your career and you're taking a look at your resume, right, you want to make sure that you are adjusting some of those things in your resumes and thinking about, for example, let's say I don't know, we're in software engineering, you want to make a transition to product management, right? So you're looking at your resume, you're looking at some of your past experiences, and I would say put on your, product manager hat and think about how did the experiences that I did as a software engineer maybe actually relate closer to a product manager, right? Not saying that you should, lie by any means on your experiences. Make sure that everything you're saying is justifiable and is, realistic. But think about how can you transition, certain experiences to allude closer to skills or experiences that product managers do, right? So, for example, let's say one of the, job descriptions on a product manager job descriptions is leading a team, right? And maybe on the software engineering, your bullet points under software engineering internship, for example, are talking about you establishing code and building a website. But let's think about it in a different lens, right? Like you probably, when you're writing that code or probably when you're building that website, you were probably working with other stakeholders to understand what were the needs and wants, right? And so when you're thinking about writing that bullet point now, maybe you should think about rephrasing it in the sense of a product manager hat.
So great. Lonnie?
Yeah, really good call out around tailoring your current role and the different tasks oriented with your position to the job description of the new position, right? So how can you indirectly or directly relate the types of things you're doing from one to the other? The thing that comes to mind for me, because I used to recruit for sales, and I realized by recruiting for sales how much recruitment and sales look alike. And if I had to make a transition to that, let's say from recruitment to sales, there's so many different things that I could relate as like very similar activities, such as, cold calling candidates, I'm cold calling leads instead, or generating a pipeline, that sort of thing. And using those transferable skills and actually writing them out bullet by bullet is something that would be helpful to kind of frame your mind in that way anyway, because you're going to have to be going into interviews at some point to talk about those indirectly related skills. And then I would also maybe throw out a suggestion around being clear about your intentions. So if I were to just see a resume for someone that wanted to become a salesperson that only had recruitment experience, let's say, it would not be evident that they're trying to get into sales unless they said so. And so I'm not sure if everyone's a fan of the objective section at the top of resumes. I think lately the trend is just to remove it because it takes up space. But if you are looking to do something unique in transitioning, I think using a line or two to include an objective on looking to transition or transfer into a different field or industry is probably a good use of space. And then you can also add a second sentence or two about which skills would transfer over well, leveraging XYZ skills into this type of role and would yield this type of success. So I don't know if anyone has an additional opinion on the objective section because they're not super trendy, I guess. But if you're transitioning, I think doing something to provide information that you're looking to change is important.
Yeah, we've already I was just gonna say we've already had an audience question about the objective summary, so I'm glad we brought that up. Anastasia, take it away.
Yeah, I was just going to say a kind of a middle ground between the objective statement that I've seen and something else I've seen is people at the top of their resume, instead of an objective statement, say what position they're applying for or what kind of they're looking for. So it's not necessarily an entire objective statement, but it's kind of a middle ground between the two. So it's clear, kind of like Lonnie said, what your intentions are.
Sure. Sarah, did you have anything on it?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to also mention too, I like the objective to explain that, but I also think what's really important is, yes, the transferable skills, but if you are really interested in transitioning, I think taking on, so for example, let's say you're trying to get into UX design, doing a boot camp or doing a side project, experience is, there's no such thing as bad experience. So I think if you can show that on your side, maybe after hours, you are building a website for a business, small business, or just doing something to show that you're passionate into this, transitioning to this field, it's going to speak volume. So definitely take those and show that you're doing boot camps or lessons or projects. It's super important.
Awesome. Great. Can you all talk about any tips that you have seen that have helped resumes get through ATS software? And for those who aren't already familiar, basically software that, reads your resume and parses through it. And I know, some students have heard that, it's possible that, key parts of the resume aren't getting through. Do you all have any thoughts on that, Lonnie?
Yeah, it's a good question. I never run into this as a recruiter myself. We do have an applicant tracking system software, but I mostly, read and go through resumes, like stacks of resumes. Of course, not at the same scale that like a computer software can, but a lot of the roles I recruit for are pretty niche. So I don't run into this issue a lot. I can't provide too much advice on like the formatting types of things. I think if you want to play it safe, use something like a safe template that's like doesn't have a ton of like room for error. But I'd love to hear from the group if there's anything else that you run into, because it's not something that I typically run into in my role.
Sure. Sarah?
So in my role specifically, as a recruiter coordinator, I coordinate the interviews. So I don't really look at all the resumes, but I have a lot of different, I think I have a lot of experience with resumes. So what I've seen is majority of the jobs I got in an interview with was all through networking or referrals, or someone I was able to get my resume in hand and then tell my story and kind of, I guess, sell my story. But with the words itself, I actually talked to someone who screens resumes. She screens like 500 weekly or something like that. And she's told me she's really looking for the minimum qualifications. So that's meaning like keywords in that. So if they have, we want someone who's organized or strong, self-adaptable, or any of those like key words, like definitely put that into your resume. Make it easy for them to see. If they're screening, hundreds to thousands of resumes, you want to make it easy for these recruiters. So I think definitely just highlight that. And if you either do it in your objective or you put them in your, I also sometimes like to do is I bold. So I'll bold like my action verb. So I say like, oh, coordinated 400 sessions, and I'll bold that just so that it really speaks volume to what I'm doing.
Great. Anastasia?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of experience in ATS just because it's been a curiosity of topic for me, because there's so much conversation about ATS systems. What are they? And this whole like myth about, the system blocking me as an applicant. I just wanted to provide like some kind of like debunk some myths. So like what an ATS system really is for people who may not know too much. Really what it is, it's basically a data system that stores resumes and applicants, right? It's not a system that, I would say like, what is even the word, like filters out candidates without any intention, right? The filtering out system is all done by a human being. So once the resumes are uploaded into the ATS system by the applicant themselves, filling out the questions, the system in itself doesn't do any kind of filtration questions. Typically, the only qualifications that I can think of that it would maybe do filtrations on is the basic qualifications that you will see on an application, right? So it's sometimes it says like, oh, like for example, for internships, there may be a question around if you're still in school. It's a yes or no question, right? And if the person answers no, maybe there's a possibility that company may set a filter to put those resumes in a different section of the ATS system. It doesn't delete them. It doesn't, not put them in the system by any means. It may just do, may put them in a separate folder. But I think there's this myth around that the ATS system is all computer generated and there's no human interaction in it at all, which is not necessarily true. So for example, when I'm, looking through applicants on the ATS system, it's me personally going into the system, kind of as Sarah said, using keywords to look for candidates that meet those basic qualifications, and then screening them individually, looking through resumes as a human being.
That totally makes sense, and I'm sure it was super helpful to a lot of students. I think this question transitions really nicely into one that we've gotten quite a bit around creativity on a resume, design-wise, whether that is colors, fonts, and some questions around putting a headshot on a resume as well. Anastasia, do you want to kick us off on that one? When is it appropriate to use them? Does it matter?
Yeah, I think something that's really interesting about resumes and recruiting in general is that it is very, up to kind of each person on their own. There's a lot of subjectivity to it. So what you like may not be what I like. So I think there's, a lot of personal preference. Personally, I don't prefer super design heavy oriented resumes, not for the sake that they don't look good. It's just that I think when applicants do focus more on a design heavy resume, what they do is they sometimes focus more on the design versus the content, right? And the purpose of the resume is to really focus on what you did. Tell me your experience, right? The analogy I really always like to say is that your resume is a trailer for your movie, which is your interview, right? So if your resume is focusing on more of an icon, more of colors, and maybe if you're applying for a UX position, that's a great avenue for you to go. But if you're applying for a software engineering position, for example, or a sales position, or any kind of role really that is, really wants to know about you, your experience, your background, I find that a lot of design resumes or 2-column resumes really sacrifice that space and that really expensive real estate.
Sarah?
Yeah, no, definitely agree. I would not put a headshot. I just don't think there's a reason for you to put your picture. Like, you don't want people being biased, so I would just scrap the headshot. Also, it takes up too much room. And I think the same thing too, if it's a UX kind of role where it is a little bit more creative, yes, like have fun with it, make it clean, maybe make it a little colorful, but like don't go over the top where you're really missing the content of the resume, right? Like you're telling your story in that resume. And I think some other advice that I like to give is I like to hyperlink my LinkedIn just so it's like one-stop shop for the recruiters. But I think it's really good is just to have a clean format, like make it easy, make sure all the fonts are the same, and just so that there's no grammar spelling errors, but really dig deep into, I think what's really important is the detail. So like what you did, how you did it, what was the results, like explain that.
Sure. Lonnie?
Yeah, I would agree with what everyone else has said around really not letting that be a distraction from the content of your resume and your background experience. Of course, there is some wiggle room with colors, and if you want to, be you and not lose sight of like your creative freedom, that's okay. But also there's a time and place, right? So if the company you're applying for is not like a super hip young startup, maybe they're a little bit more like rooted in tradition type of heritage corporation, definitely keep that in mind. And then if it is a more creative role or like a UX designer, or even a position where you do want to highlight some sort of portfolio, you can always include a link to like the type of work you've done where you do get to pour into a more creative outlet and let that speak for itself. Whether you're a designer or an engineer, or just want to include something like, actual work, I would let that speak for itself too. So again, don't be distracting. But you can add some color. I personally look at a ton of resumes all day, so it is kind of nice to mix it up and see new formats, but you don't want to take it away. You don't want it to take away from you ultimately. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. It sounds like we should nail the content first. Everything else can come second. Awesome. A lot of people want to know, how important is it that a resume is one page? Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Okay, so I think for me specific, again, it's so with resumes, you hear all different ways of like, oh, put education on top, put education bottom, or skill sets on top. It's all really subjective. For me specifically, I think a page is enough to tell your story, especially if you're a recent graduate. Really just like highlight the key points of the job you're applying to. I think going any more, I know when I first started making my resume, I maybe had 2 pages and I was talking about like awards I got in high school. Don't do that. Make it relevant. But I like a page. I think that's easy, especially remember, these recruiters are screening hundreds and hundreds of resumes. Make it easy for them to look at a resume, be like, yes, they have the minimum qualifications, and then send them off in the process.
Got it. Lonnie?
Yeah, I personally would not recommend going over a page. There's, first of all, so much you can do with formatting to allow for the content you want that's really important to be on one page. So either you have too much information, or you need to rework your formatting, but I don't ever see a reason for it to go onto multiple pages. So that's my best recommendation, especially back when we were in person, like especially at a career fair or even in a job interview, handing someone a stapled sheet of paper, just like it just isn't as clean as just like, here's one sheet to hand over. So whether or not we go back to the in-person stuff relatively soon, I still recommend the one page, and do your best to keep it at that. And then of course your LinkedIn, you can put as much on there as you want with all of the awards you've won, details about the role, because it's not the same thing, right? So you can go a little over the, not over the top, but just go more in depth on the LinkedIn.
Got it. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think something I heard that always has stuck with me is, your resume is your first impression of you, right? And it's almost like a test too, right? In terms of, how concise can you write? How do you verbalize your experience? How do you tell your story, right? That's almost a test in itself. And I think, being respectful of recruiters and how much time they have to screen resumes, I think being able to fit your story is also, as I kind of said, a first impression, and being able to do that as a curated kind of almost like an art form at this point, right? It speaks wonders, and I think that's what makes a resume stand out.
Great. Yeah, I can definitely attest. We don't hire very much on the Holdette team, but when we do, it's one page, please. Great. Can you all talk about whether or not you think that a GPA should be on a resume? Anastasia, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think GPAs, I mean, each company, it's different, right? Some more corporate companies or more companies that are more standard and kind of um, have been around for a longer time may place a more of a stronger emphasis on GPAs. What I've seen in recruiting now, or a shift in focus, is less of a focus on GPA and more of a focus on past experience, whether that's internships, personal projects, startups, anything and everything, coursework. I find that companies are now placing more of an emphasis on those kind of forms of experience. So I don't think, if you have a GPA that's high enough, it doesn't hurt you to include it. If your GPA is something that is something that necessarily isn't as high as you'd like it to be, or something isn't necessarily you're proud of, I would say leave it off. And if it's a question in an interview, you can tell your story about why that is, why it is. For a lot of people, maybe their career in school isn't as a big of a priority when they're running their own startup, right? And a company wouldn't really be able to necessarily see that unless they heard your story, right? So I think that's a conversation you guys can have during the interview if it's a priority.
Sure. Lonnie?
Yeah, I would echo that. If you do decide to leave it off, like as a recruiter myself, I never question it, like, oh, they didn't include their GPA, it must have been bad. I don't feel like it's something you need to feel obligated to include unless for some reason they ask for it. You can put it in somehow. If you're proud of it, like Anastasia said, go for it. But I never, I don't think this is a must-have by any means. So it's a personal decision. If it's something you're proud of, go for it. But otherwise, no issue to me leaving it off.
Yeah, makes sense. Sarah?
Yeah, I think both stated it well. Your value is not worth your GPA. Like your GPA isn't saying like, oh, I'm the best at blah, blah, blah. Like it's what you actually did. It's your experiences. So I agree. Like if you are proud of your GPA, put it on. But if you're not that like proud of it, you don't have to have it. And again, like if an interviewer does ask you, I think like as Anastasia put it, this is the best way for you to tell your story versus, having someone look at it and then just assume why you got this certain grade. Right. So yeah.
And I would also add like, if it is something you're proud of and want to show off, like I would, maybe like harness that energy into like explaining, the skills that are associated with getting good grades. Because of course grades are important, time and place, especially in college, but after that, they don't matter as much, right? And so maybe you're super diligent with studying and maybe you're super disciplined, you're a morning person or whatever it is, like somehow play up that as like, relating to the job. And you can say that verbally, you don't have to put that in your resume. But I think moving on from what was important to what is important is sort of an important thing to remember.
Yeah, love that. And the fact that, really nothing we can do is ever going to be fully summed up in a number anyway. So, and your GPA is, really only relevant while you're in college. So, awesome. Great. Can you talk about if there are any resumes or cover letters, we can start dabbling in the area of cover letters, that you've seen that have been incredibly memorable and why they were so? Lonnie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it kind of like relates back to the colorful, like the creative one. And usually like those ones will stand out to me as like memorable, but they aren't necessarily the ones that are getting the jobs. I think it's more important that back to the original question about like content versus creativity, content versus appearance, I think is really the root of like this type of question. And so like visually, that's kind of my thought as novel or memorable. But really like things that will yield you the position are the ones that have the content that we're talking about, with like relating it very well to the job description, showing that you are the best candidate for this because you are, pinning the specific, tasks and minimum qualifications from the job description to what's included on your resume, right? You've done this before, or you have the capacity to do it in the future. So, yeah, I would say, of course, like in addition to that, maybe these aren't novel or memorable things on a resume, but like, at least for like as a university recruiter, I look for some key important information right at the top just to make sure that you do meet some of the standards, such as your graduation date within university recruitment. Like those things do matter within, the date range you graduated, has relates to your eligibility. And especially if you are a recent grad, I typically do prefer for your education to be at the top so I can understand what you're studying, what your major is, when you're graduating, and all of that. Other recruiters might differ on that, but I personally like to see just like the really important accessible information at the forefront. So to me, it's not about like novel or memorable, but more like I'm looking through 1,000 resumes and I want to see the people that are going to jump out as the best fit, not the best like wow factor with the appearance or anything like that.
Sure. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think I can definitely relay what Lonnie is saying. Like, I don't think I can think of, a specific resume that is ingrained in my memory as being amazing. But as I'm going through resumes, and resumes are, well formatted, they have everything that I need from the start in the first 10 seconds. It really makes a difference when you're looking through so many resumes at once, and that, people have taken the time to put their graduation date when that's the first thing I, am looking for as a university recruiter. When they have their LinkedIn profile and it's linked, right? Those are things that for me make a huge difference in the long run. I think one thing that I will say I can remember as being really memorable, and I don't think a lot of people utilize it, is portfolios. Like I remember someone sent me on LinkedIn a portfolio. We get hundreds of messages as a recruiter on LinkedIn, and I happened to just see that one pop up. And it was someone who was applying for a UX position. And they sent me over their portfolio. And I happened to open that message, and I opened up the portfolio, and it was one of the most curated portfolios I've seen for the job. I didn't even look at that individual's resumes. What I did is I, asked them to send me an email, forwarded it to the recruiter, and told to the associate recruiter, and I was like, please schedule an interview for this candidate, because the portfolio says wonders about his experience, about his dedication, about his passion for the company. I didn't even need to know really what his background was. That portfolio spoke wonders enough. And I think that's not necessarily what a lot of people utilize quite yet. I think some people do it well, and some people, miss the mark. So I think there's a fine line with portfolios, but if you can do it well, I think that's one of those examples that can really forward you as an applicant. And that's probably one thing I will say as a recruiter, I can think of as being memorable.
That's great. Sarah?
I think like they hit everything is well said. Definitely make it easy. So with the minimum qualification or minimum qualifications, I definitely think you should have that all said in the beginning, because that's where, recruiters look at, they screen like the first like top and then bottom. So make sure that all the bullet points you're hitting are matching and tailoring to the job description. So immediately like you can come up and be like, yes, the candidate definitely would be a great candidate for this. So let's hop on a phone call with them. For me, I like a clean format. I like having overall like a nice format so it's easy to read, not too small. Don't try to make it super, super small and like fit in all your experiences where I just can't even tell what you did. But I think it's readable. I think I don't really have a clear one that's memorable to me, but those are just things that come to my mind.
In a way, I feel like that might be a plus. Like, don't stress over your resume too much. It won't be remembered that much. I don't know. I think that would help me. Okay, so the other side of it is you got into some questions on like absolute no's on resumes, red flags, stuff that makes you say, we're definitely not hiring them. That's the next question. What are those big red flags? Lonnie?
Ooh, big red flags. Gosh. Well, of course, like if you're not meeting the minimum qualifications, right? We're always going back to this theme. Then I'd say, gosh, I immediately switch to the next person, right? Or like flip through. If you like are applying for an internship and you clearly have been out of school, like unfortunately you just don't qualify. So like I wouldn't call it a red flag, like it's so embarrassing, but more like I have to move on. I can't like read your resume and try to reconsider, because the minimum qualifications are the things that like we are legally bound to follow as hiring for positions. So yeah, I would say that. Just top of mind now that I'm thinking of it, like typos are don't just like, it'd be better if you didn't apply. Just don't type your name wrong. I've seen that. That's super duper embarrassing. And it's like, oh, gosh, it's just like a testament to you not being able to double check things and being diligent with representing, how you're presenting yourself in the world. That's super important. I'll try to think if I have any other like glaring red flags, but those are the things that kind of come top of mind at first. What about you two, Anastasia and Sarah?
Yeah, Anastasia?
Yeah, I think it's, what's super interesting since transitioning to being a recruiter from being a student is that when we're students, we're told like, don't do this, don't do this. If you don't do this, recruiters are not going to accept your resume. And now being on the other side as like, being a recruiter and being told like as a student, like if you have a typo, you're not going to get accepted. If you're going to have a photo, you're not going to get accepted. If you have colors, you're not going to get accepted. And now being a recruiter and seeing so many resumes, I can firsthand tell you that, recruiters and hiring managers focus on the experience, the content. If you have one typo, if you have a photo, I have seen quotes on resumes and I've seen all of it. And I think that they're, at the end of the day, recruiters don't, as much as your resume does matter and your format and how it looks does matter, at the end of the day, the content and the background experience matters much, much more. I've seen plenty of really ugly resumes go through and people do phenomenal at their jobs, right? So kind of like I said, recruiting is tough sometimes because it is so subjective and you're told like, do all these things, which you 100% should to increase your odds. But at the end of the day, like, if you do one thing over another thing because that's your personal decision, or you want to include a photo because you just love including your photo, or you just love, icons and you want to include icons. I don't think personally, since I've joined recruiting, there are these necessarily red flags. I think they're best practices that you should follow, but nothing necessarily I can say that are, glaring issues.
Got it. Sarah?
Yeah, no, I love what you said, Anastasia. I don't think there's anything with like red flags, because again, it is really all subjected to the recruiter on how they view it. I think it really depends on, are you hitting the qualifications? Like that's like the big theme of the resume. Like, are you qualified for that job? So I think really hitting that with your past experiences and explaining that definitely can show that you're qualified. That's really like hitting the meat of the substance, I guess you could say. That's what we're looking for. I think one note I would put that I've noticed that people have done, and something that I wish someone told me earlier, is please do not put your address, your full address on your resume. You're sending this out on LinkedIn. You're sending out to the world. You don't want everyone knowing where you live. We don't need to know where you live. If you want to put your address, just put, you want to put the area you're trying to go for. So either like greater SF area, or if you're looking even for jobs remote, you're currently living in a different state and you want to go somewhere else, you could put in your state and you could literally put in parentheses remote, saying that you're willing to or relocate, to let us know. But please don't put your full address. I've seen people do this. I've seen it on LinkedIn, and I don't know. I get creeped out with people knowing where I live. So you don't need your full address. It's okay.
Love that. Okay, great. So talking a little bit more about cover letters, having studied computer science myself, I know that they're not huge, but a variety of experience in this group. So curious, if a cover letter isn't required, should I still write one? Anastasia?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because as a student, my freshman year and sophomore year, I was taught that you should always write cover letters. So I spent so much time on cover letters. I remember my cover letter was an entire page long, single space, telling my entire story. And because that was what I was taught. And I was like, I missed so many application deadlines because I didn't want to write the cover letter, because I didn't finish it on time, because I didn't feel confident in it. And interestingly enough, all the internships I got were with no cover letters. So if that says anything, I personally think that cover letters do hold some value if there's, some special circumstances that, you want to address that maybe it just isn't possible to address in a resume. I can see that being possible. But I would say for the most part, and through my entire career, I haven't read a single cover letter as a recruiter. And I think that is the shift in focus on applications for larger companies. I think for smaller companies, if you're applying to startups and smaller institutions, I can see cover letters being more of a value. But for larger institutions that get high volume applications, it isn't as much of a focus, truly purely because there just isn't enough time.
Got it. Sarah?
No, I agree. If it's not required, you most likely don't need to write one. I think, with a high volume, it's just there's not enough time to read through everything. But if a cover letter is required, then yeah, I definitely would write one. But I wouldn't write it regarding like summarizing all your experiences, but really writing like this is where you can really sell yourself and really share like why this company's mission aligns with your mission. I would say in a cover letter, I like writing a story. I think you can put more of your personality in this, and then explain like how all of this encompasses and why you'd be a great fit. But personally for me, I don't write cover letters. If I see a job that requires one, I most likely don't apply. They're not a bad thing. I think it's definitely another skill set on its own. But again, I think they just, when I was back in school as well, I would always constantly hear, you need to write one, you need to write one. But they just take so much time. They take so much time when that time should be focusing on networking and actually getting your face to face with somebody and really sharing your story.
Mm-hmm. Lonnie?
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said. And in addition, to kind of underscore something that Sarah said around, it being a tool to tell your story, totally agree. And if you're looking to tell your story, it doesn't have to necessarily just be the cover letter, right? If it's not required, what are other avenues you could tell your story to the world, right? Like I think LinkedIn is a great way to do that. Your About Me section, when people come across your profile and really get to see the picture you're trying to paint for yourself, and you really can brand yourself there. And if you want people to be able to refer to that later, or portfolio or wherever else that you want to tell your story, I don't think it has to be in a cover letter. That's not necessarily required. So that's all I'll add to that.
Got it. That all makes sense. We do have quite a few international students who have RSVP'd to this event and are in our community. And I know the issue of visas does come up. We got a question about whether or not citizenships and visas should be listed on resumes. And I'm curious if you all have thoughts about that. Lonnie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I just want to preface, it may be obvious, but like none of us are immigration or visa specialists. So please definitely don't take what we say as, a recommendation for what you should do with your own immigration, pursuits. And so please know that when you do apply for a company, and if you do require visa sponsorship or some sort of need, that you would work very closely with your recruiter and a specialized legal team that focuses on immigration and what your specific needs are as they relate to legal requirements. So just want to preface with that. But outside of that, it is sort of a choice that you make. It's never required to put on top of a resume unless they're asking you to. And usually they'll ask you somewhere else in the application process if it is information that is required. So, if you think it's important information to share at the forefront of your experience, then you're welcome to. But it is really up to your discretion, and you aren't required to my knowledge. If you do want companies to know about your status for any specific reasons, you can also there's other ways to share that. Usually they have some sort of formalized way for you to explain the full extent of what you need with sponsorship. So someone from their legal side will help take care of all of that versus you having to try to explain it in a little blurb at the top of your resume. So yeah, I think that's my best advice. Just please note that I'm not an expert in this area, but that's sort of what comes to mind if someone were to ask me.
Noted. Sarah, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think the same. I'm not the most expert with visa applications and how the sponsorship. I think it really is up to you if you want to put that in. But I know in a lot of the job requirements or job questionnaires, it's already asked there. So I think there's other ways to state that.
Got it. Anastasia?
Yeah, I think Lonnie outlined it pretty clearly. I don't think that, I'm in a position to necessarily give recommendations. So I'll just leave it there.
Great. We've talked extensively about the importance of the content really being the important part of the resume. When it comes to putting the actual wording down, what are your opinions on kind of overused words like team player, organized, things like that, when, they might be in the job description, but also, if everyone has it, it's not going to make someone stand out. Anastasia, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, could you repeat the question? So basically, like, what is your take on overused words, or?
Yeah, that was the question. Yeah. Just opinions on overused details and skills, mentioning words like organized, team player, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the job description, if those are things that the job description is looking for, I think you should include them, because those are things that the recruiter is going to be keyword searching for. So I think you should include those words, even if they feel maybe more, stagnant or just kind of boring, then, the way you describe those words and the way you use them in a context, make that exciting, right? As you said, like, everyone can say they're organized, but you can really tell when a person is genuine about that skill set and how they apply that skill. So I think the context to which you use those words and use those qualifications will make a difference, and the recruiter will be able to tell.
Got it. Sarah?
I definitely agree. If it's in the job description, I would put them. I wouldn't go, in your bullet points, I'm organized at this, organized. Like, you wouldn't start it all saying the same buzzwords. But sometimes, like, what I like to do too is I'll look up thesaurus and look at similar words that will encompass the word organized. So it can be like a new word. I always like to start with my resume, like an action verb, and then I did this, and then explaining into detail. I think, as Anastasia was pointing out, is you really can tell if someone is organized by how detailed they go into what they actually did. If you just write, I'm organized, strong organizational skills, and you don't go into what you did, you're just stating I'm organized. But remember, there's a difference between saying like, I'm a great leader, or I led a team of 5 people to increase blah, 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 right? Like, what one would you rather want to go with? So definitely go into detail on how you explain it. But I don't think there's anything of overly too buzzwords.
Got it. Yeah, that impact we talked about before, demonstrating for sure. Lonnie?
Yeah, agree with what everyone else has said. And then if it's not on the job description, if it doesn't feel necessary, like, I would advise you to kind of think about, if I'm just scraping for content at this point, like, am I trying to add a 4th bullet just to make up the space or take up room? If that's the case, just leave it out. If you're going to say I'm a team player, like, I don't know, that's just not a good use of space or time. So if it's something that makes you exceptional, like if you actually were like an honestly good team player, and like you increased cross collaboration by connecting different folks across teams that aren't normally communicating, then say that. Don't say I'm a team player, right? Because that's just overused, like the question is asked or is stating, but rather the impact you made, as Sarah mentioned. Say what you did that was team player-esque, and then let that be what stands out from your peers.
The showing, not telling, common cliche. Sure. We've talked a little bit about side projects before. We got a question which was basically like, with a side project, it doesn't necessarily have like a real world impact that career experience might have had. If your resume, especially maybe early on in college, is full of side projects, is there a good way to kind of show do kind of the showing, not telling, or is there like a way to kind of organize it on your resume to demonstrate the value that they had? Sarah, do you want to start us off?
No, definitely. So I think with project based, I think you can really highlight the knowledge that you gain from doing this project. I know during my, like, so we talk about, real world experience, right? Like during my time at school, I worked at Oprah's, which was our gym. I was an ambassador for different organizations or for different companies. And yeah, maybe there's not like full numbers, or there's some, it's not like, I guess, like real world experience, but it's my experience. And what I learned there is like, I'm able to, be able to present to a class of 400 people. I've been able to hit weekly metrics of 325 interactions. I'm able to learn how to market, how to learn how to do SEO. Like any projects like that, you really want to explain the knowledge you learn from it. I think, sometimes we get so caught in our head, like if I'm not working at this company or I'm not working at a job, like a job, then I'm not learning anything. Anything you do day to day, you're learning something. So don't forget the experience you're learning. This is great experience, and it's definitely going to help you get to where you want to go.
Great. Anastasia?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's, what Sarah was saying, your experience doesn't have to be, solely focused and solely, based on, quote unquote, getting this coveted internship at a specific company or a job at a specific company. Your experience is whatever you make of it. And I think that's a transition we definitely saw during COVID. And I have seen really avidly on LinkedIn, a lot of people's internships got canceled, for many different reasons. And what people did instead is, took that advantage to take that opportunity, take that time to do a side project, whether that was create a new community group, whether that was start a business, whether that was to, provide resources for other people or to do some additional coursework. Whatever you did with your time is experience that teaching you skills. And the purpose of a resume is really to take a look at those experiences, take a look at that time you spent there, and tell us how that made an impact on you as a person. Whatever you did, as long as it's meaningful to you, brings value to you as a person.
Great. Lonnie?
Yeah, definitely show off your projects if it's something that's relevant and shows off like, the impact you've made and, various skills like creativity, ambition, that sort of thing. Those are all wonderful things. And if there's room, I've seen students put a project section. So maybe it's not, it wouldn't constitute or fall under work experience per se, but let's say you were in a consulting club that worked with a client that was like, you spent a good amount of hours per week doing this for a semester. Or maybe you did have your own freelance business, but you didn't, if that doesn't somehow fit well into the work experience, like you can create a project section. And I think depending on the type of role or recruiter or hiring manager, they may look at that and be impressed with the initiative you've taken to not only do work within your job experience, but other work outside of that too. So I think it speaks volumes to the type of person you are with going outside above and beyond what you're expected to do in your job. So yeah, I show it off if there's room.
Fantastic. We are about to hit time, but I think we have time for one more question. We got a few about LinkedIn. And I think some people basically take everything that's on their resume and put it on LinkedIn. And obviously you have a lot more space on your LinkedIn. And if we're, keeping our resumes to one page, you got to pick and choose. What, I guess, if we can put everything onto LinkedIn, and curious if that's what you agree with, what then gets to go onto the resume? Like, what are we picking and choosing? Lonnie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. It's a great question because a lot of times, folks, have spent so much time on the resume that it's super easy to just like copy and paste from one to the other. And, like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to just use it as like a digital version, right? But there's so much more you can do with a LinkedIn as well. And so I personally like to see folks who have done a bit more with their LinkedIns to show initiative that they want to tell a story about themselves. There's so much potential, and there's like, you don't want to overdo it, but you have way more opportunity than just a single sheet of paper. So of course, like for instance, the About Me section, you can really take that and use it and brand yourself and share what your intentions are and your goals are personally and professionally. And then also kind of elaborating more under your work job experiences is important. But back to the original question, I know on like what must go into the resume. Of course, I would prioritize like, of course, your education and then work experience. Yes, keep the bullets, minimal. You don't want to have 10 bullets per job. And yeah, I think just a concise, story tell of who you are is important. But yeah, definitely use the LinkedIn to kind of play up your creative freedom too.
Great. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think we have that whole idea with resumes on like content and creativity. I think LinkedIn can be more of your creativity, your branding, your telling your story. I love LinkedIn. I think it's really awesome, especially with About Me. You can really go more into depth about who you are as a person, who you are even as like a teammate, and why you're passionate in the field that you want to go into, and tell more, like kind of show your complete journey. I kind of used LinkedIn as kind of like a roadmap, or just explaining my story and helping to inspire others along the way. But I think, regarding the question, it's definitely, as long as saying, put your education, make sure that the experience you're pulling from your LinkedIn is relevant to the job description, and that you're pulling, I think relevancy is really important, just so that you can show that you're hitting those qualifications. But I also wanted to mention from the previous question, with the projects, you could also put extracurriculars or volunteer experience. I think that's totally fine if that's really showcasing those skill sets and how you would be a great fit for this company or for this position.
Great. Anastasia, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I think everything Lonnie and Sarah had just said is incredibly relevant, right? Take your resume and elevate it on LinkedIn. I think one thing that wasn't mentioned is, LinkedIn is more than just your resume. It's actually a social network, a social platform where you can actually make and create content, right? Take that opportunity and tell people who you are, engage with your network, showcase things that you can't put on your resume, right? So when the recruiter does go look at, and trust me, I'd say 90% of the time when a LinkedIn profile is linked on a resume, and I enjoy the resume, I go to that LinkedIn profile. I love it when people are engaging with their community, giving back resources, giving advice, commenting on content that's relevant to them. One individual I know that I just love and are incredibly passionate about video games and the esports. And it's not something he necessarily wants to get a career in, or maybe not right now, but it's his passion. And, as a recruiter, seeing that being posted and seeing that as an engagement, it makes a difference in the candidacy, because I think that shows a lot of personality traits that, sometimes are lacking on a resume. So I think definitely take advantage of those on the LinkedIn.
Awesome. This is super great. And I know there's a lot of talk in the chat about doing a whole workshop on LinkedIn. So we'll have to get that on the books. But this was so, so wonderful. All the advice you all gave was just so practical. And I know everyone can just go and edit their resumes right now, and with all the advice that you gave. So thank you so much. Just a couple plugs at the end. Yes, definitely stay engaged on LinkedIn. You can do that by following us at Holdette, also on Instagram. And we'll just drop in the chat a link to our community group as well for college age and recent grad women, those who identify as women. We would love to have you join that group. If you just go to holdette.com/membership, you can join tonight. We'd love to have you. So without further ado, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll call it a night. Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.